Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we will talk about the railways starting more trains for the migrant workers. We will also talk about Maharashtra jails releasing half its state's prisoners due to the coronavirus outbreak. But first, we talk about something that has been on the minds of people across the globe. Now, as the number of coronavirus cases and deaths due to COVID-19 rise, people's hopes are pinned on a vaccine that would be our ultimate weapon against the pandemic. Some in the recent past have claimed that we might have a vaccine within the next 12 to 18 months. Some others have even claimed that it will come by the end of this year. But how realistic are those estimates? When can we really have a vaccine against this virus? To understand this, we talked to Abantika Ghosh, who covers health for the Indian Express and who has been extensively reporting on the coronavirus outbreak for the newspaper.
See, development of a vaccine is a very long process. There are several phases of a trial of a vaccine. First, you have to see whether it is safe. Then you have to see whether it is effective, in the sense that whether the vaccine does elicit an immune response in the body and whether that immune response is good enough to last for a reasonable amount of time.
Not every vaccination's impact lasts forever. For example, the immune protection that one gets from the flu vaccine declines over time, which is one of the reasons that one needs to take the flu vaccine every season. So while coming up with a vaccine, scientists need to ensure that its effect lasts for a significant period of time.
All of these things have to be tested before a vaccine is ready to be marketed. And even when it is ready to be marketed, for something like COVID, it's a global demand. Every country in the world will want it. So even if a vaccine does clear all those levels of testing, which no vaccine so far has done, but even after it does so, there will be issues about supply, about manufacturing, about which countries get it, which don't get it, which countries can even afford it.
Abantika points out that there are a lot of costs involved in making vaccines, particularly in its research and development. And while trying to make a vaccine available as soon as possible, its cost, at least initially, might be particularly high. Though this cost in some countries is being borne by governments. Like in the US, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases is doing a lot of trials with a private company, and therefore, the cost will be partly borne by them. In the UK, the Imperial College of London and the Oxford University have both received £22.5 million and £20 million, respectively, last month from the government. Right now, there are several research groups around the world that are working on a vaccine.
So there are over 100 vaccine molecules that are being tested across the world in various stages. There are over 100, but the rough estimate is about 6 to 8 of them are such that we should be talking about it if we want to feel very hopeful. These are 6 or 8 we should talk about.
Among these are the Imperial College of London, the Oxford University, a Hong Kong-based firm called CanSino Biologics, and the US pharmaceutical company Moderna, which is currently in phase 1 clinical trials and seems to be ahead of other research teams.
Though I have to sort of say this because, Monday the US stock markets went soaring when Moderna said that 8 patients have developed some sort of immune response to COVID after being vaccinated. Now, here's the thing. This trial, this phase 1 trial that started on March 16th, it is planning to enroll about 45 people aged between 18 to 55 years to test the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. Now, to be excited about the results of 8, the company statement, they've not actually come out with the scientific results, the company statement, I think shows how much the world really wants to hope, how much is riding on this. So that's probably why, because 8 in itself is a tiny, even 45 in itself is a tiny figure.
The Moderna says that it has got regulatory clearance for phase 2 of clinical trials and they might start them soon.
And this will actually test many more people. And they have also started accelerating the manufacturing because if all the trial stages are cleared, then as I mentioned, then the acceleration of manufacturing is what is key to actually making the vaccine available.
It is also important to note that there are risks involved in rushing to create a vaccine.
You could miss side effects. For example, if you're doing 2 small trials, then your population is not representative enough. So when you actually do a population level use of the vaccine, you might encounter side effects or you might encounter immediate reactions to the vaccine which you did not account for. And the flip side of that is when that happens, say, God forbid, if there's a death or something like that, then already this is a new vaccine. Then you will have a lot of vaccine hesitancy that will add to whatever is your existing problem, because then they'll say, no, I don't want this vaccine. That's also not good.
Back in 1976, the United States had rushed to create a vaccine for a swine flu outbreak. The vaccine had been improperly tested, and which, as it was later reported, led to the Guillain-Barré syndrome in 450 people, a rare neurological disorder in which the immune system attacks the body's nerves.
So while it is important that you hurry the process because of the way things are right now, but you cannot skip steps, because if you start doing that, you might end up having a bigger problem than you already have.
Such incidents could also give fodder to many anti-vaccination groups that are vocal in many parts of the world to further their propaganda against vaccinations which are unscientific.
Rushing something in medicine is never a good idea, skipping the trial levels. For example, there's a company, CanSino, which has a vaccine candidate, and they have now actually announced that we are moving to phase 2 trials, but they have not made the phase 1 trials public yet. So these are things that come back to basically bite you at a later stage. That's, for want of a better way to put it, this is something that can happen.
Meanwhile, scientists are also working with other existing vaccines to see if those can be effective against COVID-19, like the BCG vaccine that has been used against tuberculosis. But Abantika points out the problem with that.
So here's the problem with that. So there is just one study, and it's what is called an ecological study. An ecological study is something that looks at whole populations across countries and says, so this is what the BCG study that has appeared is. It basically looks at countries with compulsory BCG vaccination. And they're saying that these countries did not have such a big outbreak, so BCG probably does. And also BCG is known to have an immunomodulator effect. So all of that taken together, there is this theory. But there are equally powerful arguments against that theory. That is the problem. There is a very detailed argument which says that maybe you're missing something, maybe you're just rushing it. And to be fair, BCG doesn't even give full protection against tuberculosis, for which it is given. BCG is one of the first vaccines that India introduced in its immunization program. All of us have had it. India as a country has had it for years and years and years. We're giving it to the babies. We have the biggest TB burden in the whole world. There are many other things that are happening. There is a leprosy vaccine which is being tested. There's a BCG vaccine which is being tested. But all of these are because we've been pushed to a place where we have to just explore all our options. That doesn't mean any of these are efficacious in actually giving protection. It's just a hunch that you're working on. It may or may not work.
So the prospect of a vaccine, despite what some might claim, remains distant.
Moderna itself, while we are getting so excited, they, in their filing with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, they actually said that a commercially available vaccine is not likely for at least the next 12 to 18 months. Years and years and years go by before a vaccine gets cleared. The reasonable amount of time, if everything goes as planned, is 12 to 18 months. But that's if you clear every stage in a song. That rarely happens.
The fastest a vaccination has ever gotten approved is the mumps vaccination, and that took 4 years. The scientists do say that for the development of this vaccine, we have had a head start. And this is because there has already been a lot of research about SARS and MERS, which are both coronaviruses. And SARS is supposed to be approximately 80% identical to SARS-CoV-2, the current virus that causes COVID-19. But still, many experts say that if we were to consider a typical timeline for a vaccine development, it could take up to 15 years or more. And there is also a possibility that a vaccine may not be developed at all, just like how a vaccine has not yet been developed for HIV.
So UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who himself is a COVID survivor, as we all know, he wrote in the mail, and this is something that's been quoted and it's not gone down very well in many quarters, but here's what he wrote. He wrote that there remains a very long way to go, and I must be frank, that a vaccine might not come to fruition. We need to find new ways to control the virus. This is actually saying it as it is.
Meanwhile, our best weapons against the spread of the virus continue to be social distancing, basic hygiene, effective treatment and testing. With several relaxations now allowed in the lockdown, with businesses opening up, and migrant workers returning to their villages, our testing strategy has also changed, which now includes testing all frontline workers who are symptomatic.
Frontline worker would mean anybody. It would mean a cop, a healthcare worker, even a journalist. I mean, because we've been having all these camps for testing journalists also. There have been several cases. So that's one change. Then the returnees, the migrants who are going back, they need to be tested within 7 days of coming back, because otherwise there's a risk of it spreading in the rural areas. Though, to be fair, it's actually easier to practice social distancing in a village than in a city. But there are also limitations in terms of healthcare infrastructure and how far you have to travel to get treatment.
The other change is that now we are testing anybody in a hospital who develops influenza-like symptoms.
Which basically means that we are reaching a stage where our hospitals are becoming hotspots and anybody can catch, even if there is no known contact. So that is a very important development, because we've been saying that there is no community transmission and our testing strategy has been like that so far. But there are some things that have gotten into the testing strategy in the last couple of months. This is one of them, the testing of all hospitalized influenza-like illness patients. The other is what we did in the last revision, which is when we said that we will test all patients of severe acute respiratory disease, regardless of where they've been, whether there's a contact history or not. So yeah, those are the major changes.
Now, even though there have been relaxations in the nationwide lockdown, restrictions on public transportation continues. This is the reason that lakhs of migrant workers continue to remain stuck in cities or have to resort to walking thousands of kilometers home. It was keeping this in mind that the central government started the operation of limited Shramik special trains to help migrant laborers get back to their villages. Now the centre has decided that it will run more such trains and has made it clear that it will no longer need consent of states and union territories to run these trains. We speak to Abhishek Dastedar, who reports on the railways for the newspaper, about what led to this decision.
See, the decision comes with the backdrop that the centre was not happy with the rate at which some of the states were giving permissions to receive these trains. So there has been huge political war of words between the centre and the states, like especially opposition-ruled states like West Bengal and Rajasthan and Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, etc. So where the centre was claiming that there were many migrants by the lakhs, they were stranded in many states, but then they were unable to go home to these states because these states were not giving permission fast enough.
And so the centre had been looking for a way to circumvent this and find a way where the permission of states will not be required.
The destination state, as part of the outbreak containment measures, the destination state has a huge role to play. Like if you take a train full of people, like 1,500 people from one state to the other, the destination state needs to receive those people and screen them. There's an elaborate health protocol and then probably quarantine them and take them to the districts. So it was thought that if the destination state doesn't agree, then running these trains would be difficult. So now what has happened is that yesterday the Home Ministry came out with a different set of SOPs wherein it is said that the destination states would be consulted with, obviously, but the language is framed in such a manner that the element of consent is taken out of the picture.
This decision also comes when the other problem that the migrants have been facing is that of road accidents. Several over the past weeks have been killed on their way home.
Taking cognizance of all these things, there was a pressure on centre as well as state to ramp up the Shramik special services so that this so-called evacuation exercise of the stranded concluded as fast as possible. At the same time, the opposition was picking up the threads of politics. As you know, Priyanka Gandhi Vadra has been pressuring the UP government to allow buses to ferry migrants from neighboring states, etc. And that whole politics played out.
This is what happened. The Congress had offered the Yogi Adityanath-led BJP government in Uttar Pradesh to run 1,000 buses to bring migrant laborers back to the state. This proposal triggered a war of words between the two sides. On Monday, the government accepted the proposal and asked the Congress party to share the details of buses and the drivers, but later demanded that they hand over the 1,000 proposed buses to officials in Lucknow by 10 a.m. To this, the Congress accused the BJP of playing politics. And so the tussle continued. Since then, Uttar Pradesh police has booked Congress President Ajay Kumar Lalu and Priyanka Gandhi Vadra's personal secretary Sandeep Singh on charges of forgery.
And Mamata Banerjee has been saying that West Bengal has given permission for X number of trains, and then the BJP is saying that the number of trains, the permission that you have given is not nearly enough, etc. So anyway, on record, the railway minister has said several times that railways can run at least 300 Shramik special trains every day, whereas the number was not nearly enough.
Railway officials, however, have maintained that even though they don't need consent from states, they will need to keep them in the loop.
Because you cannot run an open-ended train, as in a train needs to have an origin and destination pair, right? A train needs to have a number of stoppages. So all that information can only be provided by the destination state, and also the destination state needs to be at the station with its entire machinery and logistics to receive these people and carry out screening and health protocol and take these people further to the districts, etc. So although consent has been taken out of the picture, keeping the destination states in the loop will continue to happen.
Besides this, the government has also taken the decision to run 200 regular non-AC trains from the 1st of June. These trains will run daily and will help more migrant workers go back to their homes. One, because they are regular trains and will run as per their timetables and will have a regular ticketing system. And two, because these trains would have more stoppages as compared to the Shramik specials that only go from one point to the other. But one other problem that the migrant workers are facing is not knowing how and when special trains have been running. Many have waited long enough for a way back and have then started walking back themselves. The Railways has not been publicizing these Shramik specials.
So far, Railways hasn't been running these trains as commercial services. So publicizing their timing, etc., there were no tickets being sold, right, to the public. So publicizing their timing, etc., were not thought of because these trains were being run at the request of states. Like states were bringing in people from their camps or wherever to the station, and they were being screened, etc., and they were being boarded into a train, and the train would leave at a designated time. So they were not timetable trains. So there was no point in publicizing their timings, etc., because there was also the other fear of, if it's publicized that a train is leaving, let's say, Bandra station at 4 o'clock, then a large number of people might end up gathering at the station. And that might be a problem vis-a-vis the lockdown rules and social distancing, etc. So in light of that, it was decided that the timings of these trains would not be publicized. For the simple reason, there were no tickets to be bought for these trains.
Avishek gives the example of the Bandra terminus in Mumbai, where hundreds of migrant workers turned up on Tuesday after rumors spread that the Railways was planning to run an additional train to North India. Similarly, on Monday, more than 11,000 migrants from Delhi and neighboring states gathered in Ghaziabad's Ramlila Maidan to register for a place on the 6 trains being operated by the district administration. It is to prevent situations like these that the Railways has not publicized the timings of the Shramik special trains.
However, we are told that the government is aware of this, and now Union Home Secretary has been writing to states asking them to look for groups of migrants or migrants walking along railway tracks, and Railways also has been communicating to its ground level staff to see if people are walking along tracks or on the roads, and then if they find such people, then what to do. Probably intimate the district authorities and get them to the nearest camp, and then arrange for trains so that they, instead of walking, they can get a train soon enough and go home wherever they want to go. So the center is seized of the matter and trying to arrange things so that people don't need to walk.
But with more trains running, some states have flagged that they may not be able to handle the logistics of it.
We are told that some of the states have even flagged to the center their capacity to receive more trains, because obviously in lockdown, when public transport in states, etc., for intrastate movement is not working, what happens is that the migrants who reach a certain place, they need to be taken to their respective districts in buses and other means. So we are told some states have flagged this issue that if you increase the number of trains in our state, then probably it will be difficult for us to receive more trains than what we are already receiving, considering the logistics issues. So that angle is also there.
In the end, we talk about yet another institution that has been affected by the coronavirus outbreak: jails. Last week, the Maharashtra government issued a circular that effectively facilitated the release of nearly half the prisoners lodged in the state's jails. To understand why this was done and how the process started, we talked to Sushant Kulkarni, who reports on crime for the Indian Express in Pune.
So the process of releasing the prisoners started somewhere around mid-March. And there are two starting points if we have to put it that way. One is Maharashtra Prison Department taking a decision on its own to take various measures to decongest the prisons on the background that there was an imminent threat that some prisoners might get infected because of coming in and going out of the inmates.
The second was a suo motu hearing in the Supreme Court in which the judge ruled that the norms of social distancing would be impossible to follow inside prisons, especially when prisons are crowded.
And so the Supreme Court had asked individual states to form high-powered committees to formulate rules under which the prisoners can be temporarily released during this pandemic, during the time that outbreak is going on. So this is how the process began.
These prisons have been overpopulated. Sushant explains that there are around 60 prisons in Maharashtra, including the central and district prisons. And the pre-lockdown population in these prisons was around 35,000, while their total capacity is only for about 24,000 inmates.
Now, the earlier decision of the prison department was that they would release around 11,000 inmates in total. But in between, an outbreak happened inside Arthur Road Prison, which is the Mumbai Central Prison. And at that point, Maharashtra Prison Department took a decision that around half the population of prison inmates in Maharashtra, that is around 17,000 prisoners, will be temporarily released as part of the process. Now, in that process, till now, around 7,500 have already been released. Now, this 17,000 also has a specific connotation that of the 35,000, though this is half the number, it is also the 2/3 of the approved capacity of the prisons. Now, when the prison population comes to 2/3 of the space available, then social distancing norms can be easily followed inside.
He also points out that social distancing norms don't work the same way inside prisons as they do in the outside world.
Because different gangs, especially gangs which are rivals of each other, some people who have threat have to be kept separately and there have to be some basic distancing to that end also. So this is the logic behind it.
There are two categories under which prisoners are being released in Maharashtra. One category of people are those who are under trial and are being released on bail.
Now that prisoner has to apply for a routine bail procedure as the process goes. And the norm set by the high-powered committee that they should be punished or they should be under trial for a crime for which the maximum punishment is up to 7 years. So is the case with convicts. Now, those who have been convicted with crimes who have maximum punishment of 7 years, they are also being released as part of the process. But when the prison department found out that these two categories won't be enough to fulfill the number of temporary releases that they desired, they have also now recently decided to release prisoners who have sentences above 7 years of age and who are convicts. And for them, they have put a condition that they should have come back on time on the earlier paroles or furloughs.
This does not, however, mean that every prisoner under this category will be released.
Every prisoner has to file a regular bail application or has to make an application to the superintendent of the jail in case of a parole. And then those individual bail applications or parole applications are processed and then these people are released, which is also one of the reasons that these releases are taking time to happen.
Like it has for other institutions, the coronavirus outbreak has exposed the state of Indian prisons as well. The jails in Maharashtra, like Sushant mentioned, have been crowded overall. But the condition of high security prisons or central prisons like the Mumbai Central Prison or the Yerwada Central Prison is particularly worse.
For example, the Mumbai Central Prison, better known as the Arthur Road Prison, had the capacity of 3,600 as against the sanctioned space for around 800 inmates. So it was around 4.5 times more overcrowded than its capacity. Yerauda jail has capacity of 2,400 inmates, and it had at the time around 5,200 inmates, which is more than twice its capacity. So decongestion in these central prisons was the priority for the prison administration. And we also have to understand that prisoners, though they live in separate barracks and cells, they share a lot of spaces for eating, washing, cleaning together, which makes these prisons kind of a time bomb for the spread of any airborne diseases. And prisons are known to have the history of spread of diseases. So rather, Maharashtra was one of the first states in the country to start taking the steps in this direction. For example, before even Supreme Court gave the direction to decongest, Maharashtra prisons had stopped the routine of visitors to the jail so that there is no outside contact. Then they had also locked down some of the prisons, which means that even the prison staff was not allowed to go in and out after a certain point. And the prison staff was to stay inside the prison for a specific time period to minimize the contact with the outside world.
Maharashtra has also allocated temporary prisons, buildings outside the main prison premises where prisoners both old and new are being shifted.
Same thing is also there with other states. For example, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, Orissa have seen cases of outbreak, the coronavirus outbreak inside prisons, and they too have started these processes of releasing prisoners.
These leaves, of course, are temporary, and the challenge for the administration will be to ensure that prisoners come back.
So these temporary reliefs, which are temporary paroles or temporary bails, are being granted for 45 days initially, or till the time the Epidemic Diseases Act is in force. And then these leaves are being extended for 30 days each. Now, there is this inherent risk of releasing any prisoner on any prison leave, may that be a furlough or a parole, that the person will jump the parole or bail. But it is a risk that the prison authorities had to take, weighing the possibility of an outbreak inside the prison and also the possibility of them jumping these leaves.
As of now, the prisoners that have been temporarily released will have to report to the local police station once a month.
But these bail conditions or parole conditions can be individually changed by the authority, may that be the court or the superintendent who is granting these reliefs. So they can ask that weekly reporting to the police station should be done. But at this moment, Maharashtra has just applied the rule that they have to report to the local police station, and that is how they are being tracked.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.